My goodness, we have a boatload to cover today. Probably going to try and cover more than I probably should, but it's been a long time since we've spoken last. There's lots to talk about. Good morning. The Community Voice program brought to us by Tanner Health System. Adam Uglum here in the Community Voice room, talking politics today, as I usually do when I'm hosting the show all solo in my aims to take over the world. As I called it earlier, 8:31 on the WLBB News Clock. The telephone number, 678-601-8255. 678-601-8255. Just about gave you my cell phone number. That would have been dangerous. All right, a couple of quick things before we get into the main topics for the program today. We'll cover these couple of quick short stories, take our break, and come back and get into the big kahuna of the program. That's what I'm really looking forward to hearing from you folks about. But first, a quick couple of blurbs with a couple of interesting reports that have come out, news stories, things like that. In a new story coming out of Washington State, the Pacific Northwest, not D.C., not Washington, D.C. We're talking about the state. I know we talk about Washington a lot. Washington State has increased public school spending in the past decade by $1.6 billion. Just the state. The state has increased public school spending by $1.6 billion with a B. And they've gotten what in return? Nothing. NAEP scores are pretty much flat at the end of high school, as are SAT scores over that time period. It is hard to argue that we really care about children's education when we're willing to waste $1.6 billion that is supposedly meant for that purpose. If politicians and voters in the Evergreen State do decide at some point to do something for children, the first step would be to stop wasting $1.6 billion and to follow the lead of other states like Florida or Maine, who have lowered taxes and improved education. Laboratories of democracy, my friend, laboratories of democracy, as they have been referred to. Look at the other states. Look at the ones who are winning. Follow those models. A couple of other things. We've also got, what else here? Oh, unemployment insurance is one of the big topics going on in Washington right now. Also, again, the debt ceiling coming up today. We may have a government shutdown. Now, in all likelihood, we won't have a government shutdown. But anyway, that's certainly one of the big topics. It's payroll tax cuts, unemployment insurance, job growth, the Keystone Pipeline. All those things are big topics. Now, I've covered plenty of times on the program before the topic of unemployment insurance and what a terrible thing unemployment insurance is. I know that sounds a little contradictory. Now, unemployment insurance isn't a bad thing if you're collecting what you've paid into it or what is appropriate for the rate at which you've paid for the time in which you've been paying. But this whole extending it to 99 weeks was ridiculous to begin with. Extending it even further would be even more ridiculous. We've extended it 8 times the normal 26 weeks already. It's just getting silly. I'm not going to get too far into this, but sometimes it really helps to have real-world anecdotes. And this is a letter to the editor from a newspaper in Ohio. It's very educational, and here are the key excerpts. And this goes fully in line with our... I did a whole program on unemployment insurance and why it disincentivizes employment, why it makes people stay at home. And this letter to the editor in this Ohio newspaper is key. Little did I know that attempting to hire the employees needed, which I had thought to be the easiest part, would turn out to be a nightmare, if not possible. Before 2009, if our company advertised for an open position, on average, we would get 20 to 30 applications. Interview 6 to 8 of those applicants and hire 1 or 2 based on the quality and potential of those candidates. This process has been deteriorating dramatically since 2009, and now at the end of 2011, it has completely hit rock bottom. All of the applications that we have received this year, when asked why they were seeking a job with us, 1 out of 3 answered, "My unemployment is running out and I have to go back to work." Earlier this year, after I hired 2 new full-time employees, they went through our company's orientation process. We fitted them with our work clothing and booked them to start within the next week. They both quit. One called ahead of the start date to apologize but wanted to inform us why he would not be coming in. The reason being because the government had just extended unemployment benefits again, was the reason he had admitted. The second one just didn't show up on his first day, and when I called him, he said he couldn't come in now because unemployment had been extended, and he was making almost as much as we were planning to start him out with. Our government is considering extending unemployment benefits again soon. The final absurdity might be that extending unemployment is the only thing that both the Democratic and Republican majorities both agree on. Ladies and gentlemen, it is election year. Unemployment insurance will get extended. Unemployment will remain high. Unemployment would go down a couple of percentage points, probably at the max, if we ended unemployment insurance, as we should. Really? It's 99 weeks. That is 2 years for unemployment insurance. 2 whole years. It's not unemployment insurance at 2 years. It's a welfare program. We'll be right back after the break. Jumping into the big kahuna. The telephone number 678-601-8255. Again, 678-601-TALK. We'll be right back. And we got big things to discuss.
Because of you and generations who came before, we benefit from the same level of health care you'd expect from much larger cities. It began with nickels, dimes, and quarters collected to build West Georgia's first hospital. Over the 60 years since, we've saved hundreds of hearts, delivered thousands of babies, and been there for tens of thousands of people, providing cancer care, surgical care, emergency care, and more. But none of those services would be here without you. Without those services, there's a good chance many of our neighbors, friends, and loved ones wouldn't be here either. That's what makes your support so important. Now, with 4 hospitals and more than 250 physicians, Tanner keeps the care you need right down the road, not down the interstate.
Because of you, we're here.
Tanner Health System.
We're back, and lots to talk about. This is really a big issue, and I really want to hear from you folks about how you feel on this topic. And this is, I think, little known, mostly because it's not covered much when it comes to the national media. So it may have to kind of fill you in here a little bit, but I do have some sound as well from the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a Democrat out of Michigan, Mr. Carl Levin, or Levin, I think. I'm not quite sure. I think it's Levin, actually. Anyway, yesterday was the anniversary of the Bill of Rights. It was the 220th anniversary of the Bill of Rights ratification, I believe. December 15th, 1791, not too long after the Constitution was signed into law, ratified. Remember, the Declaration of Independence was 1776, and we had the Articles of Confederation for a little while after that. That didn't turn out so good. So then we had the Constitutional Convention. 1776 was not when we began with the Constitution, just FYI. So anyway, yesterday, the anniversary of the Bill of Rights. Obviously, a big deal. We all like the Bill of Rights, especially Thomas Jefferson. Not so much Alexander Hamilton. But so we completely tear up the Bill of Rights on the same day that we're celebrating the anniversary with House Bill 283-136, and also in the Senate. The House of Representatives on Wednesday. You can find this information on my website. There's a link to the news article, and it's all over the internet. Like I said, not being covered much by the national media, but it is being covered on the blogosphere and on online news media. But the House of Representatives on Wednesday passed the current Defense Authorization Bill, which includes a provision that would codify a system of military prisons to indefinitely detain terrorism suspects without charge or trial, including American citizens caught on U.S. soil. Now, there's been a lot of defense against this, or a lot of confusion back and forth, too. Some people say that there are provisions that say that citizens cannot be arrested in this bill, but there were last-minute changes, according to Carl Levin. The bill passed 283-136 in the House, and a committee version of the bill passed in the Senate last week. 93-7 it passed. The Senate is expected to make a final vote on Thursday and send it to the White House. Yesterday they did, and signed into law by the end of the week. As revealed in the Senate deliberations last week, the Obama administration itself, the principal authors of the provision, John McCain and Carl Levin, to include language authorizing due process-free military custody for American citizens. The initial threat of veto was apparently nothing more than political theater on the part of the White House, because Obama had come out and said, look, if we have provisions in here that say we can detain American citizens, I'm going to veto it. Well, it turns out he not only did he get away from that, but he's the one, or at least his administration is the one who authored the provision that allowed for due process-free military custody for American citizens. If President Obama signs this bill, said Laura W. Murphy, director of the ACLU, Washington Legislative Office, she says it will damage both his legacy and America's reputation for upholding the rule of law. The last time Congress passed indefinite detention legislation was during the McCarthy era, and President Truman had the courage to veto that bill. We hope that the president will consider the long view of history before codifying indefinite detention without charge or trial. The entire ordeal, again, is not getting much media attention. We should all be gravely concerned, if not outright enraged, that our freedoms are being sacrificed so haphazardly. If you have no freedoms, what defense do we really have? You can find all this on my website at libertariat.wordpress.com. Again, libertariat.wordpress.com. I've got 17 followers already, getting about 30 to 40 views on regular posting days. It's growing. Lots of big things coming for the website. So again, libertariat.wordpress.com if you'd like to check out my blog there and find more information on this. It's definitely a different perspective on news. It'd be interesting to, if you're looking for something different, to sign up for, because it's certainly there. But anyway, we'd like to hear from how you feel on this. I'm going to play Carl Levin on the House floor. He had 5 minutes to speak and didn't nearly need all of it to get his point across. Here's Carl Levin. We'll take your phone calls after this.
And I'm wondering whether the senator is familiar with the fact that the language which precluded the application of Section 1031 to American citizens was in the bill that we originally approved in the Armed Services Committee, and the administration asked us to remove the language which says that U.S. citizens and lawful residents would not be subject to this section. Is the senator familiar with the fact that it was the administration that asked us to remove the very language which we had in the bill which passed the committee, and that we removed it at the request of the administration, that would have said that this determination would not apply to U.S. citizens and lawful residents? I'm just wondering, is the senator familiar with the fact that it was the administration which asked us to remove the very language, the absence of which is now objected to by the senator from Illinois?
I'm familiar now because the senator from Michigan has shared that fact with me. I'm also
So there you have it. Now, I've read several articles. Again, they tend to be very contradictory. It's hard to really get solid information on this, as it's kind of been so under the radar when it comes to the national media, so it hasn't gotten a whole lot of coverage. A lot of people very concerned about it. Interestingly enough, Obama's administration has given the go-ahead already, regardless of the law, to detain U.S. terrorist suspects without trial, even citizens. He has abandoned a commitment to veto this new security law. Human rights groups are accusing the president of deserting his principles and disregarding the long-established principle that the military is not used in domestic policing. The legislation has also been strongly criticized by libertarians on the right, angered at the stripping of individual rights for the duration of a war that appears to have no end. This from The Guardian. The law contained in the Defense Authorization Bill that funds the U.S. military effectively extends the battlefield in the war on terror to the U.S. and applies the established principle that combatants in any war are subject to military detention. One of the really confusing things about all this is the massive level of support, both from old-school rhinos, establishment Republicans, and even some Tea Party guys. I really don't understand it. There we have the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, or the House Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin, saying that the administration requested we remove the provisions that provide protections for citizens. Now, of course, I have my handy-dandy Constitution in front of me, Article 5 clearly states that no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land of naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in the time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, so on and so forth. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without compensation. Amendment 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. A clear violation of both the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, this bill. How does this even pass? I mean, everybody who's in office, every congressman or congresswoman has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution. Did they actually read it? At what expense? I mean, what is the excuse to say it's okay to infinitely detain without trial U.S. citizens? We just completely ignore the Constitution because it's for our safety, because there may be some Muslim U.S. citizen who's conspiring, or some defected U.S. citizen who's a non-Muslim who is helping Muslims try and blow up the country. I'm not really sure where the line of thought is going here, but they're usurping the rights of everyone to try and help combat the few. So the logic here is a bit flawed to me, and I'd like to see how my listeners feel about it. So please feel free to give me a call, 678-601-8255. This, among others, I think, is really going to tear this president apart, because this is going to blow up here in the next year or so. The election is a long, long, long way away. It is a serial 11 months away. We'll be right back after the break, talk more about what is going to be the big issue, a big set of issues, really, next year. And this is going to be one of them. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Adam Uglum here in the Community Voice Room.
Because of you and generations who came before, we benefit from the same level of health care you'd expect from much larger cities. It began with nickels, dimes, and quarters collected to build West Georgia's first hospital. Over the 60 years since, we've saved hundreds of hearts, delivered thousands of babies, and been there for tens of thousands of people, providing cancer care, surgical care, emergency care, and more. But none of those services would be here without you. Without those services, there's a good chance many of our neighbors, friends, and loved ones wouldn't be here either. That's what makes your support so important. Now, with 4 hospitals and more than 250 physicians, Tanner keeps the care you need right down the road, not down the interstate.
Because of you, we're here.
Tanner Health System.
Back, and thanks for the reminder. And that's really a good point. I had a caller over the break. Thanks for that information there, Chris. Regular listener of the program. Congress.org. Go to it. Congress.org. You can punch in your zip code 30117 if you live in 30117, for example, and you can find your representative. Everybody in the country who disagrees with this bill needs to be calling their representative right now. I mean, legislation can be amended, even if this thing passes, or if it already has. The information on this thing is so fuzzy. I'm not even sure if it's been signed into law yet. There's 5 articles on Drudge about it. There's all kinds of information about it, but whether or not it's been signed, I don't think it has. So I tried to find information on it last night and information this morning on that, but it's not. there. So anyway, congress.org. Call your local representative. Many of us in Carroll County, I guess for some of us it's still Phil Gingrey, and for the rest of us it's Lynn Westmoreland. But certainly call them. And what's interesting, I should have looked up how they felt on this, whether they signed on to this. Now, I wouldn't be too surprised if, as a matter of fact, I think Chambliss and Isaacson are both on board with this thing, if I do recall correctly. And that's not a huge surprise, but Westmoreland and Gingrey are a bit different. Anyway, how do you feel about this? 678-601-8255. The military is now going to have power in U.S. borders to police the state. And they're going to be detaining citizens indefinitely, without trial, against the Constitution. I mean, even if this is for the sake of our defense, what kind of precedent does this set for the future? If the Supreme Court lets this slide, and this is really the big problem that I have with this, it's not so much that I think it's going to be abused right now. The real problem I see with this is the precedent it sets for congressional law in the future, and Supreme Court cases in the future. I mean, by not doing anything, the Supreme Court is ultimately upholding this law. Now, I think this is going to fall apart in the Supreme Court. I think it will be challenged. And that's what I think is going to really cause the downfall of the current president. It's really going to be the brunt of the election. He's got so much just in the last 6 months that are going to be hot topics in presidential debates coming up this year. I mean, we've got this now. The president, his administration. I mean, it wasn't that he just signed a bill that came to him, that he can have any remote plausible deniability. But there is evidence, clear evidence, that the administration is the one who requested that there be provisions in the bill, altering the bill, such to exclude protections for U.S. citizens. How's that going to go for the president in a debate? I mean, how do you respond to that? Oh, well, sacrificing freedom is something we do all the time for security. I don't think that'll smooth over the American people very well. Senator McCain told Rand Paul during a hearing on the bill that American citizens could be declared an enemy combatant, sent to Guantanamo Bay, and detained indefinitely no matter who they are. Quite how those still in denial could even entertain the notion that the bill would not apply to American citizens. Again, the Obama administration is the one already enforcing a policy of state assassination and killing American citizens. It claims they're terrorists without having to present any evidence or go through any legal process is beyond naive. Al-Awlaki, prime example, wasn't he killed by a missile? Sure, the guy is an enemy combatant, so I was a little torn on that issue. Sure, he has constitutional protections, but if the guy is actively engaged in killing U.S. soldiers, he's an enemy combatant. It's fair game for him to die. Especially in a war zone? Yeah, I didn't really see the big deal there, but now we're setting the precedent for the same thing to happen here, not just in another country. And this is Senator Lindsey Graham, another Republican. It is not unfair to make an American citizen account for the fact that they decided to help Al-Qaeda to kill us all and hold them as long as it takes to find intelligence about what may be coming next, remarked Graham. And when they say, I want my lawyer, you tell them, shut up, you don't get a lawyer. That's according to Lindsey Graham. I already played the sound for you from Carl Levin about how the administration is the one who wanted to exclude the protections for U.S. citizens. Again, what type of precedent does this set for the future? A couple of other things are really going to decide the outcome, I think, of the election. They're going to play big roles. You've got this. I don't think it's going to. It may or may not go to the Supreme Court. That's a big pipe dream, or of sorts, a big something that's out there. But two things that are going to the Supreme Court. You've got Obamacare, and you've got the Arizona immigration law, all going to the Supreme Court. And decisions will be made by this summer, according to the Supreme Court. So, depending on how those go, they're definitely going to play a big role. Now, I think if the Supreme Court upholds the health care law, which I'm not sure it will, it's hard to say it'll have a tremendously positive impact since the bill is so unpopular. I mean, look at the polls. 55 to 56% of the population want it repealed, and only 35% of it support it. The rest of the folks don't have a clue when you look at most of the polls. More than half the country wants it repealed. About a third likes it, and the rest don't have a clue when it comes to the Obamacare law. The Arizona immigration law, Americans also largely support, closer to 70%, depending on which poll you look at. Sometimes it's 55 or 60, but as much as 70% of the population support the Arizona immigration law. And that's going to be a big determinant, I think. I mean, the president was very adamant about suing the state for enforcing those laws. And I think all of these had better be big debate topics when it comes to the presidential debates, whoever the presidential nominee is. It's going to be a very interesting year in politics. The country is really at stake next year when it comes to 2012. Everybody who voted in 2010 has to go back out and do the same thing. Democrats are still disenchanted. Democrats are still growing steadily more unhappy with the president. Looking at the polls. The president's approval rating, flat. The guy has become Jimmy Carter faster than Jimmy Carter has become Jimmy Carter. Or became Jimmy Carter. Very, very important election year. Republicans and independents have to stay encouraged. Democrats who are against the current president have to stay encouraged. Go out and vote again against everything that has a D next to its name. By the way, I think it's funny that in Carroll County there's going to be one Democrat on the ballot in 2012, and that is the president. Otherwise, there are no Democrats running for office in Carroll County. I find that quite amusing. Anyway, so before we go, I have to tell you one quick thing to end on somewhat of a positive note before we close the program. I mean, it's really been kind of sad. I mean, we've got the Supreme Court deciding on state issues with the Arizona immigration law. The Supreme Court also deciding on the health care law. That'll be interesting coming up this summer. See where they fall on that, whether they declare the whole thing unconstitutional or just provisions of it unconstitutional. And I wouldn't be surprised if this National Defense Authorization Act that goes to the Constitution, because it's a clear violation of citizens' protections granted by the Constitution. It is plain and simple. Where Obamacare, for example, can be kind of vague when you look at the constitutionality of it. Gallup has a new poll that shows fear of big government is at a near record level. Now, the headline could also have read something like this: fear of big business falls by 20% this year. Or perhaps, fear of big government has risen sharply during the age of Obama. Also would have been very appropriate headlines. This is not good news for the left. They need the government to be trusted, if not loved, to undertake great projects in the pursuit of presumed public good. Now, here's the results of the poll. 65% of the population fear big government more than they do big business. In recent years, since the financial collapse, that number has gone up 11%. From 55%, 55% to 64%. It's risen 9% since the financial collapse. So, the financial collapse, which was blamed on big business in the national media, interestingly enough, the way people think about it is completely opposite. It's being blamed on big government because confidence in big government has fallen 8% from 32 to 26. Fear of big labor has also remained pretty steady at 8 or 9%. Ever since this poll began. I think things are looking pretty good. I'm going to be an optimist here. But anyway, lots of things to be worried about when it comes up this election year. I got to run. Hope you enjoyed the program. Your national headlines are next. SRN News. Hard to believe a half an hour disappeared like that.